Do you have an attorney? Do you have any money or funds to hire an attorney? All right, the court will appoint attorney Robert Dixon and Russell Ty to represent you in this matter.
A woman in the dock accused of murder, a woman who had called in the death of her husband.
Bond is set $1 million, cash, surety, property.
What's going on? He got shot! My husband, please!
There was no one who disliked this man.
Had Uloma Curry Walker pulled the trigger?
Lieutenant Walker was gunned down as he was opening the side door to his home.
And who were the other defendants facing trial? It was a story of conspiracy and cover-up. Was Uloma a fellow victim or a killer?
Who knows what goes on in the mind of a psychopath?
Which part of the puzzle would reveal the killer's mistake? Somewhere in the city of Cleveland, young men are plotting. Amongst the cast of real-life players in this true crime story are 20-year-old Chad Paget, Paget's cousin Christopher Hine, also 20, and Ryan Doughty, the oldest at 24. What had brought them together was a plan to kill for money.
Chad Paget reached out to his cousin, Christopher Hine, who said at first he was willing to do it, but was pivotal in getting the firearm. We could see from his text messages that he had bought and sold and was involved in dealing with firearms.
But Christopher Hine never cashed in on his payday as a hitman.
During a test run a few months before the homicide, had backed out and decided that he couldn't actually be the gunman. What we were able to glean from the cell phone text record that Christopher Hine was just not willing to pull the trigger. Was at the location and just couldn't quite go through with it.
Another man was introduced, Ryan Doughty.
After the failed attempt, the group reached out to Ryan Doughty to commit this crime for $800.
Doughty, who was low functioning, had a large criminal record, but was willing to commit this for a little under $1,000 and for some marijuana.
His target would be Lieutenant Will Walker, a career firefighter. He had recently remarried and was nearing the end of his career. He planned retirement.
I would work with him on Squad 4 often, but when he joined the Fire Training Academy, the EMT staff, I worked with him 4 days a week.
On November 3rd, 2013, Will and his new wife Uloma were just days away from moving to a quiet town 30 miles east of Cleveland.
Uloma and Will have now been married for 4 months. They're packing up the house because they bought a property outside of the city, and they're going to move there and retire.
Sometime after 8 p.m., Uloma sent Will to McDonald's.
Those hired to kill Will put their plans in motion.
Christopher Hine stayed on the west side of Cleveland, and Paget and Doughty went to the east side.
The two young men lay in wait on Lamson Road, a residential street of unkempt colonial-style two-story homes near to Cleveland Heights.
At that time, Paget and Doughty were waiting for him to leave the house and then return with the food.
Will Walker drove a mile to the restaurant.
And when he comes back, Ryan Doughty ambushes him and shoots Will 4 times.
Lieutenant Walker was gunned down as he was opening the side door to his home. They were driven by a man who had no idea what was going on. He thought they were just buying weed. And when he heard the gunshots and both Doughty and Paget came back to the car, he was like, whoa, what happened? They asked, and they had said, well, it was like a drug deal gone bad. He was like, you're not getting back in my car.
As Will lay slumped against the side door of the house, bleeding heavily, Uloma was inside.
She heard the gunshots. Both Doherty and Paget were able to flee, and no one saw them there that evening.
About 8:35, Uloma calls 911.
What's going on? He got shot!
Curry Walker was frantic on the phone with 911.
Who got shot? Please!
When first responders arrived, they found Will had been shot 4 times, and his keys were still in the door.
Will was attended to by people who knew him.
The first responders on scene were people who knew Lieutenant Walker, who were with the fire department and the EMS who had worked closely with them.
The colleagues who had rushed to Will's aid immediately noticed something wasn't right.
He's covered in blood, but Uloma is spotless. There's no blood on her.
She had some training in home health care aid.
She's a nurse, isn't she?
Uloma Curry Walker had done nothing to help her husband as he lay bleeding, not what would be expected from a nurse. Shock, perhaps.
Uloma appeared to be distressed, and she put on quite a show.
She rode in the EMS on the way to the hospital.
Lieutenant Walker was still breathing when the ambulance arrived at the hospital. Within minutes, news of the shooting had reached his close friend and colleague, Ronnie Stepka.
My brother Dave was on duty at Station 17 that night, and one of the arson investigators took a phone call, and he said to Dave, he goes, "Will Walker was just shot." Dave called me, and he says, "Will just got shot. He's going to Metro." I jumped in my car, and I drove to Metro.
It was an agonizing 20-mile journey for Ronnie.
So I pulled into Metro, parked the car, ran into the emergency room, and that's where the scene unfolded. It was surreal. There was probably, I'd say maybe a dozen or so firefighters in the emergency room, and we could see him. He was in Trauma Bay 1, and we could see the doctors, nurses, and all the specialists in there working on Will. For a gunshot wound, they gave him everything. They knew he was a firefighter, so they did everything that they humanly possibly could have done with Will.
In the packed waiting room of the Metro Health Medical Center, first responders prayed for Will to come through.
We had some pure promise that maybe Will was going to survive this, because the way they kept working him, I mean, they could have called that code a long time before they actually did.
But call Will's death, the medics did.
The doc did come out, and he came right to me. We knew each other. And he says, "You want to go say goodbye to Will?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I walked in there. I held his hand for a short time. I gave him a kiss on the forehead and told him I loved him. And that was not uncommon for me to tell him I loved him. I told him that thousands of times in my career. I did. I loved being around him. He was a good guy.
Will's friends and colleagues could not hide their devastation.
I mean, the nurses crying, firefighters crying. It was a rough time.
But what of Uloma, the woman Will had married just 4 months ago?
I do not recall seeing her at the hospital, no. I do not.
The Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department launched a homicide investigation. Who had killed William Walker? And what would be the evidence to expose a killer's mistake? The investigation began into Will Walker's murder.
At the crime scene, investigators found 9mm shell casings, which they sent off for DNA testing. The investigation began with talking to family, friends, and all that knew Uloma and Will.
We don't necessarily know all of that. That is kind of some of the questions that I ask, that it's like, did you get along well with Lieutenant Walker, or were there, issues there?
We were clueless. Number one, it was Will Walker. That was the guy you would never expect to have an enemy. I know of not a single guy that had a grudge against him.
There were a couple different leads that the police followed. One was that Will had a dispute with the car dealer.
There were 2 cars that he was purchasing for Uloma and himself for their retirement, and one of them got lost, so maybe this might have had something to do with it.
He had bought a new car paid $10,000, but the car never showed up. He and the car dealer had an issue, so that was one angle or one lead. But there was no evidence to show that was true.
Maybe it was a random opportunistic killing.
Cleveland, Ohio enjoys a rather high crime rate. And it's not uncommon for people to be shot, I'm sure.
The neighborhood he was in was in a rougher part of town, and he did his civic duty there trying to change that neighborhood. He told us about drug dealers that he got chased out of the neighborhood.
But Will was seen as a neighborhood hero. He was not a target for the local underworld.
Will was quite the mediator with disputes in the neighborhood. He was well respected, so he often broke up fights.
He put together a small food bank for either a family or a section of his community.
Police are really going down these rabbit trails, and they're not coming up with anything.
Investigators had soon reached an impasse.
And that was what was so hard about, I think, the initial investigation for the Cleveland Police Department, was they couldn't find anybody with a motive. There was no one who disliked this man.
Months passed with no resolution.
There was nothing for a long, long time of real substance. We had no idea what actually went down there.
13 months after Will Walker's murder, the search for a killer's mistake had borne no fruit, no suspects, no motive, no weapon, no clues.
It was a stale atmosphere with the case for a long time.
Until December of 2014, Crime Stoppers and Cleveland Fire Department offer a reward for information leading to whoever it was that killed Lieutenant William Walker.
We sincerely hope that someone will step forward and provide some information to solve these senseless crimes.
A guy named Enrique Ramos came forward to talk to the police.
He tells them that his friend Isaiah Solomon was approached by a guy named Chad Paget, and that Chad Paget asked him if he would carry out a hit on Will Walker.
When police spoke with Solomon, he confirmed it, and he told them that Paget approached him with the request and said that it was his girlfriend's mother who wanted the hit done.
That's the first break in the case that police get.
Isaiah Solomon told detectives that he had refused to murder William Walker. So who had agreed? Police tracked down Chad Paget, and the pieces began falling into place. He had a girlfriend, a teen called Jacqueline Hines. Her mother, Uloma Curry Walker.
She had a daughter from a previous marriage who was dating a man named Chad Paget. They were living in the same home as Lieutenant Walker. Chad was mostly living there, kind of going back and forth.
Detectives summed up the position. They now had evidence that a man had been approached to kill Lieutenant William Walker. And who had approached him? The boyfriend of Uloma Curry Walker's daughter. Was this murder a family affair? A deep dive began into the life of Uloma, who detectives discover had been having a bad time with her health before the murder. She had told friends and Will of her fight with breast cancer. There was just one problem.
From everything the evidence showed us, she didn't appear to have breast cancer. She wasn't treated for any of that, and he seemed to believe that she did. At least that's what he had told coworkers and friends.
That fact had yet to emerge as cops considered forensic findings. There was no evidence to suggest that Uloma Curry Walker had fired the gun that saw her husband killed, but lying about breast cancer to him suggested more information was needed about the couple. First, Will. He seemed to have no enemies, or any that he knew of.
Lieutenant William Walker is a well-liked, well-respected firefighter and paramedic with the Cleveland, Ohio Fire Department.
And very, very proud guy. He was a go-getter. He worked hard.
William Walker was a steadfast, strong, and responsible individual. He was a firefighter, he was a paramedic, he saved money to take care of his family, he worked hard, people liked him.
He's been married before, he has 2 children, his wife Rita, and he still get along really well.
But yeah, he had a love for family. He loved his girls. Yes, he did.
That marriage, though, was to end amicably. So, no suspicions from that direction. How had Will ended up with Uloma.
In 2005, Will meets Uloma. She's a nurse. She's a single mother with a 9-year-old daughter from a previous relationship.
I think when he met Uloma, she checked all of the boxes. She was somebody who was working in a caregiver role. She was a nurse. She seemed kind. She seemed gentle.
And a fellow responder when times were challenging for others.
If you're not involved with firefighters and nurses and docs, it's crazy. There's nothing like it. It is a second family.
They were a good-looking couple who shared passions.
Will loved to dance, and I guess she did too. Salsa. Actually, Will taught me to salsa way back in the day there.
After working together at the Cleveland Fire Department for almost 2 decades, Lieutenant Ronnie Stepka had become a close friend and confidant of Will Walker.
He was a fun guy to be around, and like I said, I think she was into the dance scene as well, because he spoke of dancing with her numerous times.
It was after 8 years as a couple, Uloma told Will something that would hurry along her desire to get married.
In 2013, Uloma told Will that she had stage 4 breast cancer and that her insurance wouldn't cover it.
She needed health insurance. He had that health insurance. They'd been dating for quite a while, and that for her to receive the treatments that she needed more solid health insurance.
Will wanted to help, and he figured he could save her by providing medical insurance. If the two of them got married, in his estimation, that she would have the medical insurance that she needed. The fire department provided such.
So they got married. Not necessarily because they didn't love each other, but the main precipice for that was the health insurance for her breast cancer.
They have a quickie marriage. They elope together. They go to the courthouse, make it official. They're married, and they don't even tell anyone about it until after it's over.
I did not attend that wedding. No, I didn't. I'm not even sure if it was like a formal ceremony. I don't know if they snuck away to get married, because I would think I would have recalled that.
She also pulled at his heartstrings and perhaps a hero complex that he had.
Well, Will is this caring firefighter and paramedic. He's a rescuer.
This is somebody who is a giver. This is somebody who will risk their own life to save complete strangers. It makes absolute sense why that might have actually drawn Will to Uloma more. Like, I need to be in her life. I need to make her better.
The couple wanted to start their lives again in many ways.
They wanted to get out of that neighborhood that they were in. Like I said, it was a rougher neighborhood.
Let's retire and let's just move out of the city and start a family together.
They bought a little place out in the country. I can't remember what city it was in, but it was somewhere out east of Cleveland. And they moved him in. I remember him showing me pictures of the house from the back porch overlooking the land he bought. So he was very much looking forward to that move.
But what investigators discovered was that Uloma was living a lie. She did not have breast cancer and was keeping a secret.
She's in serious financial debt. Credit cards, loans. She is in deep, tens of thousands of dollars.
A few months into the marriage, Uloma's debt problem got worse. She had taken out more loans, and in fact, she had taken out credit in Will's name. She feared that he was going to discover what she had done.
We believe William Walker had the understanding that they had more money than they actually had and wasn't aware of necessarily all of the debt that Uloma had brought into this marriage and then accumulated in the short time since they had been married. Uloma was in this real tough spot with a brand new house, and she was going to have to tell Lieutenant Walker that they financially couldn't afford it, that they couldn't stay in it.
It appeared to detectives that Will had been killed just before he would have discovered that Uloma was in deep debt. The couple's planned move could have meant Will would discover from their bank accounts that there were thousands of dollars in the red.
She didn't want to have him start to be suspicious of her. Does she really love me, or is she just after me for my money because she's so in debt? And so I think she hid it for a very strategic reason, and that's because she was just waiting it out until she could hatch her plan.
But what plan? By the start of 2015, 14 months after his murder, all detectives knew for sure was that Chad Paget, the boyfriend of Uloma's daughter, had asked someone to kill William Walker. Uloma had not pulled the trigger. There was much to do in the hunt for a killer's mistake. Witness evidence had made detectives suspicious about Uloma Curry Walker, but more evidence was needed to complete the picture. What was her relationship with her daughter's boyfriend, Chad Padgett?
Police get a subpoena, and they search the cell phone records of Chad Padgett.
A major portion of this case was the cell phone records.
Jennifer King was the assistant county prosecutor tasked with bringing Will Walker's killers to justice. Cops will tell her that there had been a lot of cell phone traffic between Chad and a group of other potential conspirators.
Investigators didn't know which suspects to be looking at, but once they did and they had to subpoena those phone records, when the phone records came in, especially the text message records, that then gave them a clear identity to who the defendants were.
And they find this continuing communication between three people, Chad, Jacqueline, Uloma's daughter, and a guy named Ryan Doherty. Well, cops know who Ryan Doherty is. I mean, the guy's been a troublemaker in the neighborhood. He's been around a while.
And he committed a couple armed robberies after this had occurred. And so a violent individual, but someone who I don't think had the intellectual capacity to really realize the depth and impact of what he was doing.
If he was not the brains of what had happened, who was?
Next, police subpoena Uloma Walker's cell phone and her financial records.
When Uloma was brought in, she told investigators that she had no financial problems and everything was fine. What Uloma didn't know was that investigators had already pulled her financial records and they knew what type of debt she had.
Uloma had crippling money problems, but she also had her eye on a solution.
She knows that Will has a $100,000 life insurance policy.
To stand any chance of getting her hands on Will's life insurance payout, Uloma would need to be married to him. Will had died, knowing nothing about Uloma's debt or her fake diagnosis. Now, by the summer of 2015, detectives had uncovered both facts.
Investigators asked Uloma when was the last time she had been to the doctor. And she explained that she hadn't been in the last year since Will's death, which was really strange for someone with stage 4 breast cancer.
Detectives were sure that they had their motive and that Uloma had something to do with the murder, but no one was talking. They had to let Uloma go free once again. But in August 2015, another break in the case.
Police get a DNA sample from Chad Padgett, and it turns out to be a direct match to the shell casings found in the Walker's yard.
At the same time, forensic examination of the suspect's phones had finally yielded a damning piece of evidence.
Not only was there a lot of communication between the parties, but the cell phone records show that to the precise minute of the crime, they were in contact.
They find a text message that Chad Padgett sent out right after the murder. It says, "We have a body."
For one of the suspects, denial no longer seemed like an option.
In August 2015, Chad Padgett was arrested, and while in custody, he laid out the entire plot.
Accused of complicity to commit murder, 21-year-old Chad Padgett confessed. This was the story he offered from the late summer of 2013.
What he told investigators was that Uloma had approached him with her daughter and said they wanted to have Will killed because he was abusive to her.
Uloma was very good at making people feel sympathetic for her, to feel these genuine emotions for her, and then to use that emotion to her advantage and to get them to do whatever she wanted them to do.
It had been in summer 2013 when Uloma Curry Walker had begun to pull together the pieces for murder.
Uloma's daughter, Jacqueline, would later testify that she, her mom, and Chad Padgett, her boyfriend, were in the car when her mother raised the idea of having Will killed.
Uloma made them an offer.
She believed that there was a large insurance policy that she would get paid out on, and then she would be able to give Mr. Padgett a cut in that, and then also her daughter would receive a cut in that.
And Uloma offers Chad $1,000 as a down payment if he can find someone who can get the job done.
Chad Padgett had some difficulty. There were a couple of other people they reached out to who we ended up having testify that they had turned it down.
It was a small sum to offer for killing a man.
The fact that someone would agree to do it for $1,000 shows that that person is very, very immature, very, very impressionable. So it fits that she would use her 17-year-old daughter's friends to do it, because no reasonable, respectable killer would do that.
According to Paget, Uloma Curry Walker put in place her plan to become a widow, just 4 months after becoming a wife.
She saw this chunk of change that she wanted to get. The only way to get it was for William to die, so William had to die.
And so what she had discussed with Chad Paget, her daughter's boyfriend, was killing Mr. Walker.
2 years after the murder of Fire Lieutenant Will Walker, investigators had to now prove what Paget had told them was true. They pieced together the events of the night of November 3rd, 2013.
We were able to take all of the text messages between all of our main defendants and splice them and timeline them to see that Jacqueline Hine was in communication with Uloma.
They could learn where each of the conspirators was at the time events had unfolded, even the transport that they used from the Regional Transport Authority, the RTA.
By our cell phone pings, we were able to find the route that they traveled, that they were at the location, and then how they slowly then came back to the west side.
They established that once a team of killers were clear of the scene, Uloma dialed 911.
What's going on? He got shot! Who got shot? Please!
I think Uloma had been waiting for this moment. She had been waiting for the moment that her plan could come to fruition, that he would die, and then finally she would get her hands on his money. And I think that it was very deliberate that she didn't want to save him.
Detectives spoke to the first responders who had tried to save Will's life that night.
We had quite a few witnesses, some who played even dual roles, who knew William Walker personally and then also were involved in the case, from some of the firefighters and EMS workers who arrived on scene.
They testified to Uloma's odd behavior after Will was shot.
Some of those first responders who stated just that she had a fairly odd response, and that she acted hysterical, but then also was kind of reserved and asked, you know, is he still alive, in a way that didn't settle well with those first responders, people who see these kind of tragic things regularly enough to kind of know how people typically react. So even the text messages, once Lieutenant Walker had passed at the hospital between Jacqueline Hine and Uloma, were not ones of shock and dismay, more like we had finished the job.
Detectives in Cuyahoga County had enough to charge Chad Paget with the aggravated murder of Lieutenant William Walker.
Regarding Mr. Paget, Your Honor, he would like to waive the 24 hours notice of reading that indictment, which he has received, and enter a not guilty plea.
All right, not guilty plea will be accepted. This goes and will be heard by Judge Ronald Suster, a visiting judge. $1 million cash surety property original bond is continued.
But according to Paget, he had not acted alone. When would detectives move on Uloma Curry Walker, the woman who appeared to be the ringleader? One by one, Uloma Curry Walker's accomplices were arrested, awaiting trial for murder. Perhaps fearful she would be next, Uloma played her final card, demonizing Will Walker.
Before she turns herself in, she writes this confession up where she claims that Will Walker was physically abusing her.
And I think Uloma thought this is gonna be the easy story. People are gonna believe it because Will was a strong firefighter, very macho.
Uloma denied masterminding her husband's killing. Instead, she blamed her only child.
Uloma, when she went to trial, she turned on her daughter and said that it was her daughter Jacqueline who came up with the plan.
Her defense was that she had nothing to do with this. These were these kids, these young adults that Jacqueline Hines and Chad Paget did not like how strict Lieutenant Walker was. They didn't like how he was controlling her, and they wanted him gone, and they used their friends to gun him down, and that Uloma had nothing to do with that.
I think that it's very surprising that Uloma tried to blame the entire thing on her daughter. Even some of the worst criminals that we know are still protective of their own kin because they have that evolutionary perspective of, well, if I can't survive, at least my kin will, and then my genes will go on forever. But in this case, she was all about self-preservation.
The trouble is there's no evidence of this. No one can provide any kind of clues or history or anything that shows Will Walker was abusing her. It's pretty clear that this is another one of Uloma Curry Walker's lies.
In September 2015, Curry Walker was charged with her husband's murder.
Do you have an attorney? Do you have any money or funds to hire an attorney? All right, the court will appoint attorney Robert Dixon and Russell Ty to represent you in this matter.
Cleveland's first responder community were hearing for the very first time that the person who'd had Lieutenant Will Walker murdered was none other than his wife.
We had no idea what actually went down there until the story broke. And when that story broke, it was huge. It was huge. It took my breath away. It took my breath away.
Having received and reviewed a copy of the indictment, if you wish to waive the 24-hour notice, reading it in open court, and you wish to enter a not guilty plea is accepted. Bond is set $1 million, cash, surety, property. Thank you.
I never knew there was any strife at home with him.
Ronnie's colleagues did not suspect her, despite her odd behavior on the night of the murder. In fact, Curry Walker received their help.
She received some benefits from like the Firefighter fund and some initially, since it took a while to even discover that she was a defendant in this. So she did receive, approximately maybe $50,000 in payout. His
wife, she played a game. The firefighters jumped on board and helped her move. That's what firefighters do. They come to the rescue, We offer that support. We had no idea that she was involved in this in any fashion at all.
Later that month, September 2015, Uloma's daughter Jacqueline Hines was also charged, along with Christopher Hine and Ryan Doughty, the man accused of pulling the trigger. At first, each of them protested their innocence.
Regarding Mr. Doherty, Your Honor. He has received a copy of his indictment. He would like to waive the 24 hours notice and reading of it and enter a not guilty plea this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Corrigan. Court will accept a not guilty plea.
On behalf of Mr. Hine, Your Honor, we'd like to waive the 24 hours notice, reading of the indictment which he has received, and enter a not guilty plea this morning.
Thank you. Not guilty plea is accepted. $1 million cash, surety, property bond is.
But as the trial date approached, stories began to change.
We had been working on essentially five defendants and slowly getting statements from them and then working out plea negotiation.
Chad Padgett had already admitted his guilt. Then the man who fired the gun, Ryan Doughty. On the day of the court case, more success for prosecutors.
Literally the morning of trial, Christopher Hine finally pled. We thought we were going to trial that morning on Uloma Curry and Christopher Hine, so we were able to work out a plea deal.
Hine, Padgett, and Doherty all struck deals and were given between 18 and 28 years in sentences.
Uloma's daughter, who she had tried to blame for the shooting, also began to cooperate.
And Jacqueline realizes she can't hold out anymore. So Jacqueline goes to police and turns herself in, and she spills the whole story and her part in it. And she agrees to testify against everyone in trial, including her mother and her boyfriend, Chad Padgett, who is the father of her child. Prosecutors decide not to pursue adult charges against Jacqueline. Instead, they treat her as a juvenile. She's 17 at the time of the killing. She is sentenced to 1 month in a juvenile lockup.
Her co-conspirators now on the side of the state, Uloma stood alone.
Going into the trial, we had just one defendant that we were trying, Uloma Curry Walker. All 4 defendants testified against her at trial, and so that was part of the plea negotiations prior to, was we wanted that testimony.
Curry Walker remained resolute about her innocence.
The fact that she didn't take a plea deal was not surprising to us. Just in my experience, when you see defendants who commit kind of shocking crimes or things that are hard for you to wrap your skull around, they're not the type of people who are willing to plea. And they would rather take their chances with the jury than admit any sort of wrongdoing.
Uloma gave her side of the story to a packed gallery at Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court in Cleveland.
The courtroom was filled daily with family members, and then someone from the Cleveland Fire Department was in that courtroom for everything. The relationship between William Walker and Jacqueline Hine maybe wasn't warm and fuzzy, but despite what Uloma ended up saying at trial, it wasn't strained either. There wasn't some hatred or anything between them.
Uloma stuck to her story about her new husband abusing her.
The defense team never presented any evidence of abuse, and there was no record of abuse.
If this was in fact true, someone would have known, someone would have heard. We hear reports of domestic violence all the time where the neighbors say, oh, they were fighting like cats and dogs. There's none of that here. She very clearly doesn't understand how the criminal justice system works.
Dozens in court testified to Will Walker's character.
We had quite a few of those people who were able to give us, give the jury an understanding of what an upstanding and beloved figure that William Walker was. Just about how much he was respected, how much he loved, and how much they still had invested even a couple years later after his death.
He was a guy's guy. He was everything that you can want in a guy, in a man. He was fun, intelligent, knew how to communicate very, very well, was in touch with his community.
Some of them wept in the hall, and it was just heartbreaking.
The evidence revealing her mistakes was put before the jury. Detectives had first uncovered her motive.
The prosecution is going to show that this was all about money.
What did she have to gain here? She was in this financial trouble. She thought that she was getting this large payout, and it made sense that she had a reason to have Lieutenant Walker killed. Jacqueline and Chad just didn't quite have the reasoning.
Uloma's 4 co-conspirators assisted the prosecution. The star witness was Uloma's own daughter.
Some of the most moving testimony at trial came from Jacqueline Hines, and listening to her describe her relationship with her mother, the manipulation, the guilt that they had, and how strange and perverted their relationship was.
What she said was that Uloma told them once Will was dead, she'd be able to collect the $100,000 insurance policy.
She would then be able to get out of the debt that she had, live in this nice new home they had purchased, and be rid of Lieutenant Walker.
Uloma and her daughter's relationship clearly wasn't healthy.
That Jacqueline was trying to please her mother, give her mother something there.
Cell phone evidence was presented illustrating how Uloma had enlisted young men and women to her homicidal plans.
These were these kids. They weren't the criminals that were just gunning people down who they didn't like. That wasn't in their criminal history, and it didn't appear to be in their character.
Uloma's daughter Jacqueline testified that at one point her mother suggested that they pull the pocket out of Will's trousers after they shot him to make it look more like a robbery.
Attorney Jennifer King has some sympathy for the predicament that Jacqueline found herself in.
I mean, she was partially responsible for the death of Lieutenant Walker, but her testimony was compelling enough and had a ring of truth about just how manipulative Uloma was throughout her life and would lead to something this extreme happening.
There was one final surprise witness in the prosecution's case: Will Walker's adult daughter from his first marriage.
She told police that before Uloma had come forward with his claim about breast cancer, that her dad had told her that he was still in love with her mom, Rita. And so Uloma knows this, and she decides she has to act fast, and that's when she concocts the story to get Will to marry her.
On July 7th, 2017, the case against Uloma Curry Walker came to a close.
The trial lasts for just about 2 weeks, and it takes jurors all of 2 hours to reach their decision. It's the first time Uloma Curry Walker has shown any emotion, but she breaks into tears when the jurors announce their verdict, guilty on all counts.
Judge Sherry Madej presided over this trial, and with the way that murder is in Ohio, it is a life sentence, but she's serving a life sentence that's been held up on appeal now.
Her mistakes were many, including not hiding well enough the reason that she wanted Will dead.
She was doing all of this to get her hands on Will Walker's $100,000 life insurance policy.
And then just so rare that you see a female defendant for a murder for hire, for something like just for money issues that were not insurmountable money issues.
Her calls and messages to the young men that she tried to or actually enlisted were too easy to find to hide her guilt. And an irony, the murder had all been for nothing. She would not have received any insurance payout.
There was a wrinkle in Uloma Curry Walker's plan. What she didn't realize was she and Will had only been married for 4 months. Will hadn't had a chance to change his life insurance policy.
She wasn't even the beneficiary of the insurance payout. She hadn't even done the due diligence to discover that his daughter from a previous marriage was the beneficiary. So that part of it was just shocking, and it's a very unique case.
She had been exposed as a woman with a motive to kill who could beguile innocents, like her own daughter, into the plot to kill an innocent man. A man considered a true hero by his colleagues.
It was one of the greatest losses that I can recall in my career on the job. He's just one of those guys that just the character he was, could laugh. He'd have me howling, laughing so hard. Yeah, he was my boy. I loved him. I loved him with my heart. I know he had my back, and I know I had his.